I try not to live in the space of regret. It was, let's figure this out. What do we do next? When you become in tune to listening to yourself, there's a pressure point and you're like, you have to get out, otherwise things are going to go like super left. So I started to get into that habit of listening to myself a little bit more. Even though those conversations maybe with myself were kind of slightly newer, I wanted to kind of lean into that a little bit more at that point.
When it comes to creativity, yeah.
Oh, we're just launching straight in there.
You don't know what the question I'm going to ask you. You know, with creativity, can you be born with it or can you learn it?
It's a combination of both. I think everyone is born with an element of creativity. I suppose creativity is just a means of approaching problem solving, right? In our formative education or kind of at primary school, we all do a breadth of subjects, and a lot of it is about being as expansive as possible, exploring different ways of being. And I think slowly but surely, as we continue our education, people start to filter out those things that they're less interested in, right? And maybe focus on things which are slightly more analytical or logical in that sense. And so to that point, in terms of learning, it is definitely something that can be learned, but something that we're all born with is my kind of take on that anyway.
With creativity, just in general sense, versus the logical, I feel like logical, it's like maths, you know there's an answer or there's an end point. But what I'm starting to realize more and more is that with creativity, there's no such thing as a right or wrong answer.
Yes.
It's about being comfortable and saying what you're creating. Because like I remember when I was a dancer, and when I was a dancer, and then it came to the freestyle bit, right? And I always hated freestyling because even again when I played the saxophone, I hated it because it felt unnatural for me to just play what I'm feeling. Whereas in the back of my mind, because of like I was quite academic, I felt there should have been a right way to do certain things. So it always felt a bit unnatural. So even like with drawing, for example, I don't feel I can draw, but I see some people who draw worse than me able to create a living out of that, right?
Okay, subtle shade.
Subtle shade. For you, when did you realize that you're a creative person?
I think just to touch on the points that you just made, I think this idea of being in the unknowing is really important. And is also something that takes a lot of practice, right? I think there's also this element of vulnerability in being in a space of unknowing and being okay with that. So, because you mentioned that you felt really uncomfortable in kind of those freestyle elements, but it's something that I think some people are maybe born intuitively with that kind of, or in that space of the unknowing, but then there are lots of people who have to go through a process of unlearning to get there, and actually I think it's a really liberating space to exist in, and for me, in terms of when I first realized or kind of got the sense of creativity, I think it was very early on. I don't necessarily remember, or I can't necessarily pinpoint the first moment, but even when I look back at pictures of my like little me in like nursery, I was always doing something that involved like a making. So I think that is, of course, the origin point, and I suppose where I perhaps felt most at home. So yeah, that's the starting point, really.
Did you always feel that at some point you were going to do something in the creative industries?
Yes and no. And I say yes because those are the things that I've always gravitated towards. Subject-wise, it's always been kind of the creative subjects. I think I was always one of those people who was... I was always actually quite academic, but then I was also very creative. So I remember even kind of as a child in primary school, whatever, I would always finish my test before everyone. I would always be the first to get things done. So I remember like my teacher used my homework or like my answers to mark everyone else's stuff because like I kind of excelled academically in that space or in that way. And so in terms of the career aspect of it, I always wanted to keep that going along. But of course, it's that like stereotypical trope of having Nigerian parents and being like, I don't know if kind of doing something in the creative industries would really work. So I suppose for me, as I kind of continued my kind of schooling career, so to speak, and thinking about what a career path might look like. So I think I then continued to search for what might be something in the middle. And I don't think I really arrived at what that would be until I was in college and kind of applying for my UCAS. And so for me, at that point, what I thought would be a good meeting of creativity and I suppose something which maybe seemed a little bit more normal to Nigerian parents was like to go into marketing. Okay. So I applied for marketing and all of my university kind of offers were based on studying marketing. I was just like, oh yeah, this could be cool.
Obviously now you're a curator, right? So obviously that wasn't on the cards, going from marketing to be a curator.
Not. Didn't even know what that was.
And so like, did you, whilst at university, because you also done like architecture and interior design, like how did we get to that point?
Me kind of deciding to apply for marketing was much more of a consolation prize because I went to, you have these like career advisors in colleges or whatever. I went to go and see the one kind of at the college that I was attending, and she was just like, oh yeah, you won't get into university to study architecture. And I remember feeling like really disheartened. I think I actually cried. You know me, I don't cry. That is. But yeah, I remember feeling really disheartened actually after that. And I went and had a really long and hard thought about it. I was like, okay, I'm going to apply for marketing. But a part of me was also like, oh, I'm going to make sure that I get really great grades, kind of as a means of showing her that I could do it, right? And so I did. And then on the day that I received my results, I called up. So I had an unconditional offer, actually. So I was like guaranteed to go to university anyway. But I called up the University of Kent and I was just like, hey guys, I actually really want us to study architecture. Do you have any space on your course? And they were like, yeah, sure. Do you want to come and have an interview? And I was just like, yeah, I'd love to. So I remember I had to go and basically put together a portfolio, take this train up to Canterbury to go and do this interview. And then I was accepted onto the course. I don't think that architecture and art are too distant. I think that they're all kind of under this large umbrella of the arts, so to speak. And that's probably one thing that really stands out for me when I look back, in that I remember when I was looking at the prospectus for the University of Canterbury and looking at the way in which they talked about architecture, this is the thing that always sticks out to me, is that they described it as being the most public and pervasive of all the arts. And something about that really appealed to me. I think I liked the broadness, because I don't know, I don't really like to commit too much to something. I like, again, maybe in that idea of the openness, or kind of I suppose, actually that speaks to why I do all the stuff that I do now, because I like the openness, the porousness of kind of being able to move between a multitude of things. So that really spoke to me, because I think initially I was like, oh, maybe I'll do interior design. I was like, oh, actually if I do architecture, then that's kind of the broader umbrella of like doing architecture, and then within that, there's like the interior design, interior architecture, and like all of the other stuff. So I was like, okay, let me go as broad as possible. So that's kind of the in-between step from like the marketing to the architecture. And then I actually ended up changing the course because I felt that perhaps I wasn't enjoying it as much as I thought as I would do. So I was like, okay, I'll switch out to interior design. So I got to London, had a new university, went there, that was okay. But actually, I suppose the course that I was on still felt very close to architecture. Again, and thinking about this umbrella of kind of architecture, interior design, and all of that type of stuff. And actually, a lot of the tutors that I had on the course had worked very closely with architects or were former architects in that sense. So I still felt that there was a good focus on, I suppose, the exterior composition of a building as well as kind of the interior of buildings. So I felt, pretty happy with that course. I mean, even with the dissertation that I wrote, there was still a focus on social housing, which I'd always been really interested in as a kind of concept in the ways that it formed community. So those were, again, some of the things that I really pulled out that I was really interested in, which, again, for me now, looking back, I can see are very much a part of, or they've popped up in like really weird ways, like as part of my career.
What kind of stuff would you say?
So I suppose, okay, me kind of having that interest in social housing is also because I lived in such close proximity to some of those housing estates that I referenced in kind of that dissertation, but also living in that context myself as well. And the work that I did at Tate, for example, as curator of their young people's programs, was all about ensuring that young people from disadvantaged backgrounds or kind of lower socioeconomic groups had access to those spaces, right? And the majority of those young people would have lived somewhere where I grew up. Do you get what I mean? So kind of it popped up in those ways, and kind of it just became a part of the work. And so I suppose once I had graduated, I had an internship, which I did. And internships always make me laugh because I think they're great, but also really horrible at the same time. I think they've changed now. I hope they've changed
Horrible.
now.
How badly were they treating you?
Oh my God, like a dog. No, I'm joking. No, but at the time, a lot of internships weren't paid.
Yeah.
I think that was maybe still an issue up until a couple of years ago, but it meant that at the time when I graduated, I was doing this internship, which was 5 days a week. I think, they were paying for my transport. And then I think, oh my God, like this is so dreadful. I think they were giving me like £3 a day for lunch.
£3?
Yeah, or something, maybe like £5 max, which is crazy when you think about it. And again, in thinking about these ideas of equity and how you make kind of various sectors much more representative of a diverse range of thought, I think it becomes really difficult, especially in those circumstances when kind of that is the normal practice, to not kind of pay people because there is the assumption that people's parents will be able to pick up the bill when when that isn't the case for everyone. So that was kind of part of my experience, and I did that.
Because on that as well, it's like you're just cutting off access even more so. Because
absolutely.
I remember like when people used to talk about Topshop and head office of Topshop, where people are coming in and they're not being paid, but then it's like, oh, so-and-so, they're living at their parents' house. Yeah. And so if you're someone who's graduated and you're not even if the salary is like say 16K, you can't really survive in London on 16K, like rent, all the rest of it, like how can you do it? So you're just gatekeeping again, and then the whole system just continues to repeat itself.
Yeah. Absolutely. So that's like, a huge issue. And again, I think that's something which hopefully has changed now. I know that there have been like a number of initiatives put in place, and again, when I talk about these types of things have cropped up in the work that I've done kind of beyond that, and kind of going back to the work that I did at Tate. We had a group of young people, roughly around a group of 130 of them, which we worked with and recruited from kind of 4 local boroughs to the gallery. But the idea was that we were always giving these young people opportunities, but making sure that they were paid a London living wage, right? As opposed to just, here, come and, enjoy it.
Come for the experience.
Yeah, exactly, for the experience, right? So it was about moving much more beyond that. So yeah, that's why I feel like so many of the things that I've experienced, and then a lot of the things that I've then worked on have come full circle, so to speak. And then I randomly got approached. on LinkedIn. This is when people weren't using LinkedIn as Facebook, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. So yeah, I randomly got approached on LinkedIn after I think I wrote this blog post talking about why university doesn't work for, I can't remember, something along those lines, right? And one of the people at this recruitment agency came across it, and they were like, oh, I read the blog post, think you're amazing, we want you to come and work with us. And I was just like, wait. I was just like trying to figure out if it was like a scam or like some sort of catfish or whatever. And they were like, no, like legit, like come into our offices to do an interview. I was just like, okay, cool.
Was it a similar role, like interior design?
No, it wasn't. I then moved into working in the recruitment side of things, which is super random. The recruitment agency specialized in architects, interior designers, and kind of any admin support for kind of working in the design field, right?
Interesting.
Yeah, I remember I had to then quit this internship, and it was like really weird because I remember I'd just graduated. I think I went on holiday with my mum, and then came back, and these people that I'd like gone to see, this recruit, they were like, oh yeah, you've got the job or whatever. They're like, oh, we want you to start immediately. That I was just like, yikes. So I think I came back from this holiday. They were having like a summer party or whatever. And I like just about got there. And then I was just like, oh my God, I don't know how to tell these people that I'm leaving this job. So like I wrote a little card, and I was just like, thank you.
What, on the actual day? At the summer party?
Yeah, I wrote this card and left it there.
Wow.
And I was just like, thanks for everything, guys. But also at the same time, I was just like, you guys weren't paying me anyway.
Yeah.
So like.
Yeah. Did they ever follow up?
They did. I can't remember what was said though, but yeah, they did. They were like, yeah, thanks. And I think also because I'd also asked them if there were plans to like open up a role, because it just wasn't very sustainable kind of working in that way. So I think without a kind of firm answer, I was just like, oh, I can't do this long term. So yeah, I mean, I ended up working in this kind of recruitment space, which is interesting. I did that for all but 3 months before leaving that. I was just like, I'm not normally a quitter, but so I ended up leaving because actually, if I'm being honest, I felt really miserable being there, and I felt really miserable in that. I was helping people do the stuff that I wanted to do, so I just left this like role with hopes of being like an interior designer, and then I was helping people get jobs as interior designers. So I was just like, this is not.
Did you ever think about trying to place yourself somewhere?
Do you know what? When I did leave, they try and place me somewhere.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, obviously that's, you know, what recruiters do.
Yeah.
But that didn't really work out. And so I got this job with this woman, like this like kind of one-man band, like, and she was looking for an assistant. I did that. She was very interesting. It was all of these like really, I mean, it's expected, but it's like going to stores and lifting heavy things, and I was just like, this is not for me. Yeah. So, and I also didn't necessarily feel like super involved in the design process. I mean, I did design some things which I feel like she then used but didn't credit me. But anyway, that's, you know, by the by. So yeah, I think that happened, and then I ended up getting a job as like a junior designer. It was still like a very small like company or whatever. I didn't really enjoy that much because we were working on lots of residential projects, and I suppose for me, having done this dissertation and looking at like social housing and kind of why it works so well and all of that type of stuff, I was just like, oh, am I contributing to the problem? Because I'm working on these new build houses, and it was all very monotonous as well because it was the same thing. There was no variation or whatever. So that happened, didn't last very long, and I was just like, oh God, like I don't really feel like I necessarily want to work in this design space anymore. I think I felt very, again, just kind of disheartened by kind of, the treatment, or kind of some of the, or maybe less so the treatment, but the experiences that I'd had in that space.
Got it. So then at this point, you were like saying, okay, maybe design isn't for me.
Yeah, I was doing a lot of browsing on the internet, and then I came across this young volunteer project at the London Transport Museum, and that was an invitation for, I think it was like a 6-week project, and again, connection to architecture. They were looking to explore city architecture, because at the London Transport Museum, have you ever been?
I just, in my mind, I just see buses.
Yeah, there are lots. It's just lots of buses.
In not Blackfriars, Barbican.
No, Covent Garden.
Okay, no.
Okay. Well, you're right. It's lots of buses.
Okay.
Lots of buses and kind of train carriages, and they have this large kind of model in the gallery, gallery called their Connections Gallery, which is basically this large, I think 1 to 2,000 scale model of the City of London. They wanted to update that with lots of new London architecture, like kind of the strata at the Elephant and Castle, the gherkin, the cheese grates, you know, all of those like bits of architecture which have popped up like in the past 10 years. And so that was like, I was just like, okay, this is kind of interesting. I was like feeling a bit disillusioned with architecture, but it kind of fits in with the narrative. So I did that project, which was super interesting. You know, the lady who was running this program mentioned that the kind of young people's team kind of at the gallery were looking to set up this program for young people called the Young Freelancer Project. She was just like, oh, I think you'd be really great. You should apply. It wasn't kind of a full-time position as such, but it was definitely a way to open the door into kind of moving into this arts and heritage space, or kind of working in the context of museums. So yeah, I end up doing this. It's kind of a year-long program. And as mentioned, it's not kind of like a full-time thing, but what they offer are these projects which you can kind of put yourself forward for. Did loads of those. And it was a really interesting year in getting to know and understand the museum space and kind of what it meant to work in the context of museums, but also at that point as well, what it meant to engage with a public audience as well. So that's really kind of, very long way of sharing how we get from being in the space of architecture to kind of finally getting into the museum space.
During, say, that period of like, I guess, finding your feet, how was that mentally? Because because you spend so much time studying something, working towards it, getting a glimpse of it, getting a taste of it, working for these people, you're like, nah, these are rubbish. Like, one thing which is commendable is the fact that you're like, this ain't serving me, so I'm out.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel that I should have stayed a bit longer to see if it pans out?
I try not to live in the space of regret, so there wasn't too much regret on that end. It was maybe more of a, right, let's figure this out. What do we do next? Like, how do we get to the next point? Or kind of more of a sense of urgency to kind of get something sorted out. So when you kind of become in tune to listening to yourself, kind of there's a kind of pressure point, you're like, you have to get out, otherwise things are going to go like super left. So I think I started to get into that habit of listening to myself a little bit more, even though those conversations maybe with myself were kind of slightly newer, but I wanted to kind of lean into that a little bit more at that point.
When you went into the museums, and because I guess you were doing that like part-time alongside Offspring, or
still working in Offspring, man. getting my free trainers, getting my little discount here and there, you know.
But it's cool though, because you get to kind of mesh the two worlds together, kind of see, okay, I'm actually, because this time you actually are enjoying something, because you're sticking it out for the 12 months and you're seeing, okay, maybe there's progression here.
Right.
Were there like elements of the program where you're like saying, okay, this thing here, I want to double down on a little bit more?
I think the thing that I really enjoyed was definitely working with the public, and again, and when I say working with the public in the context of any workshops that we had kind of put on for young people, but also I really enjoyed doing tours, because there was a depot in Acton, because of course, like, it's the London Transport Museum, which is based in Covent Garden, but they had this depot in like North Acton, which it's basically kind of the archive. So there are more buses, more buses and more train carriages, but then also all of the kind of broader kind of ephemera and kind of documents and items and objects which relate to London Transport's kind of history, which is super interesting to me, in just being in the presence of those things that have existed before I did. So that was one of the things that I kind of really enjoyed, as well as mentioned, kind of working with the public.
So what happened next after that?
2017, I then get kind of invited to do this postgrad in academic practice in art design and communication at the University of the Arts London, which is really amazing, because that was also offered to me as a bursary, so I didn't have to pay for it.
Nice. Which
is really amazing. So I was just like, oh my God, okay, cool. I had always thought about teaching, but I always thought it was going to be like an end of career thing, you know, when you're like 55 or
giving
whatever.
Back to the community.
Yeah, you know, exactly. It was just like, I'll do that later on. So I never thought that I would do that so early in my career, but I really welcomed it actually, and it was really great. So I did this postgrad. It was a year long. I learned about what it meant to teach in the context of a university, and I started teaching. So I became an associate lecturer at the University of the Arts London. And for me, it was kind of a trip actually, because there were I was just like, not you lot paying like £9,000 a year, and I'm the same age as you, and I'm teaching you. So it was like kind of weird for me, kind of, especially working with the kind of students that were doing their masters, because we were basically the same age. I think it was a great experience for me, and it also took into consideration the experience that I'd built in and alongside that. So kind of I did that and was doing multiple projects with other museums in and around doing that. And then in 2018, I got my first art job. Yeah, that was interesting.
You're finally ready to let go of Osprey.
Yeah. Well, do you know what? Actually, I was still working at Osprey. Everyone's been like, oh, no, the hustle. Yeah, I was actually still working at Offspring while I started at Tate. I think for the first 2 months, I was still working at Offspring whilst I started at Tate. And then I was just like, oh, no, I have
it's
to.
Too much.
Yeah, it was too much. So I did an assistant curator role, another assistant curator role, and then I got a permanent assistant curator role. All of this within literally the first year. I had 3 roles or whatever, and then I was in that role. So I got this permanent role, right, as an assistant curator. Then a role as curator came up in another team. I went and applied for it. I think this must have been I think I was in the role for all that kind of permanent role of assistant curator for all but of I want to say 2 months or something like that, 3 months max, and then I applied for this curator role. Gone.
How did you know that? Because how did you know that you wanted to become a curator, especially when you were because you could have spent most of your time being a lecturer if you wanted to. You could have doubled down on that.
Yeah.
Right. So how did you know that curation is where you wanted to be?
I think the reason why I knew it was where I wanted to be is because I was really interested in working in the context of the museum, and working with artists. And I think education plays a hugely important role in. I think one of the things that I was really interested in education is the space for play. I think it's really important to play and to play with ideas and to explore. But also, when I talk about this idea of play, is on the other end of that challenge. And I think there's something really important about challenging thought. And I don't mean in a combative sense, but in kind of giving the opportunity for an exchange of dialogue to create new ideas. So I enjoyed all of that very much so, but I liked being around objects and things and kind of, you don't have that in the university. It's just people. Fair, I like people, but I also like things and objects too. So yeah, that's kind of how I kind of knew that that's what I wanted to do, so to speak. And I actually tried for a really long time to balance that. So actually, while I was working at Tate, even though I kind of went up, I was still lecturing. So I was still doing that. So I was still balancing it, which I think actually really served me very well, because I like to take from all of those areas and kind of I thought, and I still feel, that all of those things feed each other. So it was okay, I'm doing this within my teaching practice. This works great within the context of the museum. And especially because I was working primarily around museum education, there were lots of crossovers in that sense. So yeah, that's how, or kind of why I felt that those things went really well together.
Because with education and curation, I see there is quite a close link, because as a curator, you've kind of got a lot of responsibility in terms of showcasing to the public what is art, what is not art, what is valuable, what's not valuable, right? When it comes to those discussions with your colleagues around, say, the curation of certain objects, is it collaborative, or can it be quite combative in terms of deciding what is good versus what is not so good?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that. I think it can, for the most part, I think it's harmonious. But of course, people are really passionate about what they're passionate about, right? And I think a lot of the passion over particular objects or artworks comes from a very deep-seated kind of personal connection to those things, right? So in that sense, that's where things can become political, right? I don't think there's kind of necessarily too much of a discussion of what is good and bad art. I think, and take this as a pinch of salt, I think all art is good, right? In the sense that there's going to be somebody out there who's going to appeal to, right?
So is that how you define art?
Right. No, absolutely, because I think art is about mirroring our experiences in life, but also as a means of kind of not predicting the future, but it gives us space to dream or think of kind of what exists beyond us, right? So kind of I can't come and deny and be like, oh, that's terrible. It might not kind of sit close to my experiences. So kind of aesthetically, I might not enjoy it, but I can't deny its meaning to somebody else, right? So in that sense, that's why I say that there's no bad art, because it means something to someone out there. Right?
So when you're curating an exhibition, so let's take the rites of passage one as an example. You're basing that off your own personal feeling or what the feeling you think it can give other people. Like, how do you go about, say, creating an experience such as that?
So rites of passage specifically has actually been something which has been a thought of mine for a really long time. Not in kind of this, I suppose, final iteration as people have seen it, but in thinking about these ideas of liminality and liminal space.
What do you mean by that?
So I suppose liminality or liminal space, it's this term which was coined by this anthropologist, Arnold van Gennep, which speaks to these different transitional periods in a person's life. So kind of be it marriage, birth, death, kind of processes of ritual. But really he splits it into these 3 stages of separation, transition, and this idea of return. And I suppose in thinking about my personal connection to this idea of liminality or the liminal space, that I think that started from kind of the point at which I was cognizant of the fact that my family are Nigerian. Do you know what I mean? So I think for anybody who grows up in the diaspora, kind of wondering why the kind of social cues within your home are different from kind of what you experience socially, kind of creates this conversation about kind of, as I was using the language then, duality, kind of what does it mean to kind of be both British and Nigerian. So I'd always been thinking about these things in kind of how my culture differed from somebody else's culture. So that for me is a starting point. And as I continue to have conversations with friends who were also experiencing similar things, or kind of I started to read more broadly, I kind of then arrive at this point of using this language of the liminal or liminality in probably, and I want to say 2018, because before then I've been using the language of duality and kind of being kind of 2 things, but for me, I think that's so limiting because it is a binary. It is kind of either or. It is just these 2 things. And that's why I was saying earlier on, this idea of the unknowing, it kind of becomes something which is really important. And kind of that space of the unknowing is also very liberatory because you can be as expansive as you like about your experiences. So kind of, that's really the starting point. And I think that's actually, if we even look at academia, that is always a great starting point for research in kind of thinking about something which is kind of personal to you, because without that, then what are you basing it on? Do you get what I mean? Yeah. There's a reason why people decide to research something. It is because they have a connection to that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be as invested in spending years of their life in kind of researching that thing. So it always starts with a personal connection in that sense.
It's like that freedom to have an opinion on something, rather than being directed by someone else to look at something. Yeah. And because even with art, like now that I think about it, everyone can have a viewpoint on anything, but it's about you being able to express it. And then whether people agree with your opinion or not, it doesn't really matter. It's about what you personally think. Is that right?
No, I think so, absolutely. All right then, art critique.
I'm learning.
There's definitely that, right? Because it's, and again, that's why kind of the conversation with self is so important. And why I was saying that when we're talking about creativity, that there is kind of a lot of learning and unlearning, and it's a kind of transition, as kind of with this idea of the liminal space, it is a transitionary process at which it's never really finished, but something that we continue to move through.
Yeah, because at the exhibition, just walking through it, and the first thing that always got me is just the contrast of like the dark blue versus like the colourful pieces, and then walking through, and then you get to the end where it's the mirrors. I walked into it's a dark room, mirrors on the floor, picture on the top, and you're looking down. And I believe it's meant to represent a slave ship, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then you have the sounds going through it. It's quite emotional, especially because I was there just by myself, and you kind of can feel the darkness just enveloping you, right? Which I think is pretty cool. Like, how was the whole process of putting that experience together, like working with the artists? Are these people that you've already known for a long time? Did you research them? Like, how did it go?
Yeah, so I'd say the majority of the artists in the show, I want to say like 90% of them I've worked with at some point in my career. So again, I think that idea of rites of passage functions in a multitude of ways, right? For me, this show feels like a rite of passage and kind of putting something like this together, but then also kind of all of these artists who have been very kind of key to my journey, my transition, all being part of this, for them coming together collectively, it also signifies something very important in a kind of broader art historical sense as well. So one of the artists I met kind of in very early days, Phoebe Boswell, I met her before I'd got my job at Tate, and kind of at a project at the Wellcome Collection, and then kind of some of the other artists like Adelaide Damois, and Ambonio and Aisha Faisal, I met literally kind of on my first projects at Tate as an assistant curator. So like in a way they met me as a baby, like, and we're kind of, it's weird because like we've developed friendships and kind of sisterhood, like kind of these weird familial relationships, but kind of they've been part of the journey with me. So yeah.
No, I love that. It's like you have to keep those connections, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's definitely that. I think as we were talking about earlier on in thinking about one of my previous careers, and kind of relationships are really important. And again, especially with art and the fact that we're dealing with a lot of those artists' personal experiences within the work, those relationships and how you handle them and how you handle their work with care is really important. So yeah, it's kind of all about the relationship, really.
So for someone who's new to the scene, as not necessarily familiar with like art or museums in general, because a lot of your work is to do with connecting people with the arts, and obviously in the UK, all they seem to do is just like keep cutting funding, which is making it even more difficult. So how does someone even start like to get used to it? Because I feel when people talk about art, like as a normal person, the first idea that comes to mind is making money, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, which will probably be my second question. But like, how can people try and get closer towards the arts, as it were?
Luckily, living in the UK, most of our museums and galleries are free, which I think is a great way to get started. I think one of the things which is probably the most difficult, which again, thinking back to the work that I did at Tate, which is all about improving access to it. I think the biggest hurdle is for people to actually kind of leave their homes and step over the threshold of the museum in the first instance, but actually they're all free, so you can go and see them anytime that you want, well, within their opening hours. But actually, that's actually a really important point, because often people are working, so maybe opening times feel a little bit difficult, but most museums are open kind of 10 to 6 daily. If we're talking about kind of national museums, kind of like a Tate or V&A, they might do like a late opening on a Friday, so like you can go there until 9 o'clock, which is great. Or they do these Friday lates, so I think Friday lates, which I got to work on a little bit just before leaving Tate. I did a number of Tate lates at Britain. Later Tate Britons. Oh my God, not me forgetting what the title's called, but yeah, the later Tate Britons. I think I did maybe about 3 of them just before I left. But those are a really great entry point for people who are not quite sure about the museum, because it's kind of a once a month. It's a late opening until like 9:30, 10 o'clock. There's often music. There's often alcohol. Which like shouldn't be like a huge selling point, but it helps. Can work, yeah. But also kind of things which sit slightly outside of just the regular displays, which would be workshops, performances, things that are really engaging for people. So I think that's a great entry point for people who, like, I don't know, for students, for young people, for older people who are maybe approaching it for the first time, to kind of do that as like a fun thing with friends, or like on a date night, or like, yeah, I think it's, or even like as a single person exploring a new city, I think it's a great way to kind of meet people. So yeah, I think that's a starting point. But yeah, the fact that the majority of museums are free is really brilliant. The only thing that you will probably have to pay for are some exhibitions, which again, I know that kind of conversations around ticket prices can be a little bit tricky, especially in the context of like the cost of living crisis.
But I, with exhibitions, I feel like so for example, when you go to a museum and you say that, oh, there's this exhibition going on, you got to pay for something, and you got to pay to enter, they don't make it appealing as to why you should go in to see this exhibition versus the rest of the gallery. That's how I feel personally. Right. Like it hasn't really sold it to me. And I think with some of the museums or the galleries that you go to, there's a lot of emphasis on the past, not necessarily on the artists, which are actually making some great pieces of work right now. And that for me is where it seems to be like a gap, because, okay, yeah, you can show me some 17th century French art. It's not going to do anything for me, right? But then show me something from somebody who grew up in London and they now have an exhibition in New York or Chicago, like where those people, like, you know, to make it a bit more closer to home. Yeah. That's what I find quite difficult. That's why going to your exhibition, for example, it meant more to me. That because these are artists that are still alive to an extent, right? And they're making stuff which can still evoke a feeling, and it's not fake. It's like it's authentic. It's their own experience. And I guess more of that needs to be either advertised or showcased. Yeah,
no, I think you're right. There's definitely that, and I think museums are trying to do more of that work. Anyway, I'm not here to save them, but I think some of them are trying to do more of that work. But I think you're right. There does need to be more of a dialogue, because actually, so you have different displays. So, you know, the kind of smaller individual rooms, like the permanent or kind of semi-permanent displays that you'll go to. And so a lot of them will be kind of historic art, but kind of, even for example, if you go to the Tate Britain, right, kind of they'll give you a map and that will show you the starting point of where the earliest work from, I think, is it like pre-1400s? I can't remember, but they have a map which shows you, so you can walk around and then get to the present day, or you can go directly to the present day. So kind of that's something which, again, maybe most people aren't aware of, but kind of, there's a cheat code basically. You don't have to, you know, see the old stuff, but if you want to, it's there. And again, I'm just using these as examples because I've worked there, but at Tate Modern, that is a focus on international art. So the majority of the work there is by living artists. Of course, some of them have maybe, you know, passed in recent years, but it is kind of more contemporary art. Yeah, I mean, Tate Britain does that too, but kind of focused on British art because it's take Britain. And I completely agree with you that kind of there should be more showing of younger living artists. There is, but again, it's whether or not that's made visible to people, because I think for people who are approaching art for the first time, they might be less familiar with who these people are, and the fact that I don't know, there are lots of really young artists who are on show at some of these kind of more well-known or established galleries as part of group shows and things. And so you find kind of some of the commercial galleries like I work at, which are also in thinking about this broader arts ecosystem, do the work of looking after the artists that you find in the big nationals on a day-to-day basis, right?
What does that mean?
So kind of the national museums and galleries, so to speak, they have a collection, right? A vast collection of works. They do the job of putting on exhibitions which might last, I don't know, anywhere from 3 to 6 months, but then they also have their kind of permanent displays, which I just spoke to. And so the works in their collection are either acquired through like an acquisition committee. So each acquisition committee maybe has like a particular focus. So I don't know if it's like Middle Eastern art, African art, British art, or kind of film, performance, whatever. And they will perhaps put forward works. They will have a discussion kind of collectively with a group of people who are, I suppose, qualified or have the knowledge or the research kind of knowledge to make a decision as to whether or not why this work should enter the collection, why they should spend the money on that. And so, of course, once those works enter the collections, they're not always going to be shown because there are so many, which is why you have these kind of rotating displays, or why you have these exhibitions which bring together particular narratives that kind of a curator or kind of a group decide that they want to highlight. So there's that side of things. And then the commercial galleries is kind of, I suppose, where the money goes round. Commercial galleries do the job of representing artists. So if we think about like the music industry or whatever, maybe like a similar in that context, that kind of commercial galleries, they will have a focus on kind of what type of artists they represent. So they might be from a particular time period. They might also represent kind of an artist estate. And so when we're talking of an artist estate, it is kind of all of the work to do with an artist who's maybe passed away, right? Okay. So there's that. And what they will do based on that is to, in their locations, in their galleries, is to put on shows which last a lot less time than the nationals, because their shows might last anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, right? But that is a means of exposing that artist to a broader audience, and they will do the job of then talking to museums kind of locally and internationally to be like, hey, we've got this really great artist.
I see.
They should perhaps be part of your collection, or working with private collectors. So these private collectors who are just people who really appreciate art and kind of want to buy these artworks and live with them in their homes. So kind of they will do the work of building up a great client base who will buy the work, and some of those clients might keep the work, or they might donate it to a museum, which then kind of becomes part of that museum's collection. So that's kind of in a very condensed way. They're separate, but they're not separate at the same time. They are kind of, they go hand in hand, because without the commercial galleries, you wouldn't really have the museums, and the artists themselves wouldn't be able to survive day to day without the sales of their work. So kind of it's all part of one big ecosystem.
Got it. So with like the rise of NFTs, digital art, are you seeing that impact, say, the physical art world in terms of like either how valuable certain pieces are, or the general consensus of what is deemed as art, what is deemed as good, and just generally like what is great? Because I feel like when you have a lot of things, then it can devalue on the same side of things. I don't know, I just want to get your sense of like where you see things are going in general, like with digital.
I think the digital space is really interesting. I won't lie, I'm not paying like too much attention to it. I think for me, I saw more of the kind of NFT stuff pop up during the pandemic. Of course, that weird period of time when everyone was on Clubhouse. So I kind of got to hear and find out a little bit more about NFTs in those spaces. And I would say kind of post that and those conversations, I haven't seen what I would think is an influx of kind of people having conversations around kind of NFTs. The conversation is still ongoing, but in the art space, I don't think it's made like a huge impact just yet, because people are still buying the physical artwork. That's very much a thing which is ongoing, something that people really enjoy, because the idea of living with something is maybe much more appealing to people than kind of just the digital aspect of it. I think kind of NFTs can be really interesting in, I suppose, the conversation around, if something gets resold, this idea that an artist gets a cut of it. So as a means of tracking, I think it can be really useful. But yeah, I suppose that's one facet of it. And then you mentioned AI as well.
Yeah, like because obviously if people want to start collecting art and investing in art, and physical works can be more expensive just generally, whereas like AI generative art can be quite cheap, can be quite accessible. You can give it some prompts, it will give you what you're looking for, but you miss, say, the creativity of the actual individual. So I guess like with that happening, where should someone start if they want to start collecting art, right? Should they go towards a digital work where there could be more upside in the future, or more focus on, say, the physical stuff?
I don't think that's a great way to look at it. Yes, art is an investment, but I think first and foremost it should be about what you enjoy. I think people who go for art as investment kind of straight off the bat will often end up disappointed, because I suppose it's this idea that if you buy something, you're just like, yeah, I'm going to flip it, you know, I'm going to make, I don't know, 20K off of it or whatever. If it doesn't happen like that, then you are left with a disappointment. And so in that circumstance where it doesn't sell, can you still live with that thing? So I think that's why it's always important to first start with, do I like this thing? Am I okay with looking at it every morning when I wake up? You know, that, I think that's kind of the best place to start. Of course, some people do end up selling artworks, but actually most of the collectors that I've come across don't want to sell the stuff, because they've got such a deep kind of personal and emotional connection to the work. So for them, it's like, actually, I really love this thing. It might not be on show all the time, but I have a really deep connection with that. And actually, that's something that we try to, I don't know, I think some people try to avoid in kind of selling too much of the work. Yeah, it's that whole idea of flipping, kind of, you're just buying to kind of just sell it. And that can be really not a nice experience for the artist either. And kind of seeing their
work. But they need to make a living as well, right? Like they need the art to sell in order to make something.
They do, but kind of those sales primarily come from galleries, as opposed, like, if let's say you buy an artwork now, right? Let's say in like 6 years' time you decide to sell it. If there is kind of lots of interest in that particular artist's work and the price, I don't know, let's say it's tripled since kind of you bought the work or whatever, you would see that profit, but the artist might not. Actually, I think there might be some European laws that an artist might get like a cut of that, but kind of generally they might not, so it doesn't necessarily always benefit the artist. And actually sometimes the selling of work can be really harmful. So kind of the same way in which kind of we look at like stock markets, like if like a whole bunch of like works of one artist come to the market suddenly, then kind of
devalues everything else.
It can do you get what I mean? Which then puts the artist in a really tricky position, because then it's like, oh, no one wants their work, you know.
So when we see like some artists where their stuff has gone for auction for like $800,000, for example, on the headline it sounds amazing, but in reality they might not be seeing half of that money at least.
Yeah, they probably won't. And so, yeah, I mean, that can be both a positive and negative thing. I suppose it depends on where you are in your career, kind of whether or not it's a positive or a negative thing. But also just because an artwork sells for kind of a particular amount at auction doesn't mean that that's automatically where the work will start selling at. Yeah. So kind of, I mean, the markets are a complex thing. I'm just starting on a journey of understanding that. But yeah, it's very complex, and I don't think that there's necessarily like one thing which I suppose impacts that by itself.
Well, you're in a good place. So I think now, like, if you were to go back to like the younger version of you, so like 10 years ago or something like that, would you still go through the steps you went through in terms of like interior design, this and the other, in order to find being a curator? Or would you just say, you know what, be a curator?
Oh, no, absolutely. Do you know, I'd do it again. Yeah. I would definitely do it again. So much of what I'm doing now wouldn't have happened the way that it's happened without kind of all of those steps, the ways in which I think, or the ways in which I approach my curatorial practice now comes from that breadth of experience. So yeah, I'd do it again.
Do it again. Okay. I'm going to ask you, can I ask quick fire questions? All right, cool. I'm going to ask you quick fire questions.
Quick fire questions? No.
So if you could curate or collaborate with any historical figure to do an exhibition with them, who would it be?
Ooh, oh my God, a historical figure. I don't know. I like people who are alive.
Okay, who is someone alive then?
Don't ask me that. Oh my gosh, that is so tricky. God, I feel like the people that like immediately pop to mind are.
You've already worked with them?
No, I haven't. I haven't actually. But like people like Theaster Gates, Ellen Gallagher. Yeah, those would be like two people that I'd be interested in working with. They're amazing. Okay.
And if you could connect, say, the art world with another industry to make like a crazy exhibition, what would it be?
Okay, the one that I'd be most interested in is, you know, again, it's very well kind of traversed, but is with fashion. I think it's super interesting how fashion and art continue to have conversations. So fashion, art, architecture, all that good stuff.
And final one, what advice would you give to your younger self?
The piece of advice that I would give is that the worst thing they can say is no.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a constant theme.
The worst thing they can say is no. They say no, you pick yourself up and go again, find someone else who's going to give you a yes.
Don't stop hustling.
There we are. Don't stop. Hustle always.
Thank you, Peju. It's been amazing.
Welcome.
Appreciate
Thank you.